Right, everybody, welcome back. Our next session is the Walsh Group proves passwordless is possible. I'd like to welcome Bailey from Microsoft. I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, hey y'all, my name is Bailey Bercik, and I'm a program manager at Microsoft. And my role is pretty unique within Azure AD, so I'm split 50-50 between talking with customers like the Walsh Group and also getting to work with the feature PMs actually on the product side. So in that area, I mainly work with security defaults and identity secure score, but I also do some work with my apps, my account, basically anything with a my in front of it within Azure AD. But today, I'm excited to tell you about the Walsh Group. And while Pete and Tim could not be here today in person, they are here in spirit, and I have some recordings of both of them talking with y'all about their passwordless deployments and the work we've done over the past year and a half together. And so if you haven't heard of the Walsh Group before, they are a small family-owned business, about 4,000 info workers based out of the Chicago area. They do have 250 locations across North America, so that was something we had to focus on during their deployment. And they are leveraging multiple different passwordless methods, and we'll get into those in a moment. And so something today that I wanted to talk with y'all about are, first of all, the passwordless methods and user groups. So I'm going to go through how those conversations went with the Walsh Group, the different groups that they have, and how you could apply that to your own organization with the different things that you're looking to deploy. Also communicating the business case, so how you go about talking about passwordless to folks who aren't necessarily identity or security people, which was something the Walsh Group encountered. And then also some deployment gotchas. So for that, I will get a little bit deeper into the technical side of some things that threw the Walsh Group for a loop and have thrown some of my other customers for a loop as well. So that this way, if you do decide to take a similar path to the Walsh Group, you don't fall victim to the same things that they kind of noticed as speed bumps along the way. So in order to just set the stage on some of the methods that the Walsh Group has deployed, so first of all, they're using Windows Hello for Business, which I'm sure some of y'all may have heard of, but if you haven't, it's basically like Face ID, but for your laptop, and it works for Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices. Passwordless phone sign-in with the Authenticator app is something that they are deploying right now, actually. And then also their FIDO2 security keys, which they currently have for their admins, and then they're looking at rolling out for their frontline workers. And speaking of those different user groups, these are the three that we mapped out for the Walsh Group. And really, if you think about it, any organization of any size typically goes back to these three user group populations. And I want to walk through each of those and the decisions the Walsh Group made and how they may apply to your organization as well. So first of all, on the admin side, so looking at doing those secure management tasks and things from either their laptop or their mobile device. At the Walsh Group, they fully use Windows 10 devices. And so what they did first is that they divided and conquered. So even though we have these three separate user groups, they tackled them in phases. So first looking at their admins, since those were the folks that were typically, talking about some of those identity and security concerns quite frequently, so they were most plugged in, easiest to work with, then going to their information workers, and then next they're going to be looking at those frontline workers. But on the admin side, they currently have Windows Hello for Business rolled out, and then they're also looking into using some of those FIDO2 security keys for certain use cases. I believe one of their admins is a Mac user. So if you weren't aware, if you do have a Mac, you are not able to use Windows Hello for Business or FIDO2 security keys. So they've been using passwordless phone sign-in for the Authenticator. Now on the information worker side, this is a little bit similar. You'll see it's almost the exact same boxes. But even though the Walsh Group is North America based, another customer of mine has quite a few user groups over in Europe. So with my European customers, they're very much concerned about privacy and especially the use of like biometrics with authentication. So especially on that side, just as a note, if you do have quite a few employees or users based out of Europe or perhaps somewhere where your employees may not want to use a personal device like a cell phone, I'd really recommend exploring FIDO2 security keys for that, because even though it is a cost to your business, it's a lot cheaper than purchasing phones for everybody and asking for them to do passwordless phone sign-in from that device that you are then purchasing for them. So that's an option as well. But as you can see, these are all similar, and again, based off of the use cases for your organization, divide and conquer appropriately. The one that is super unique is going to be those frontline workers. So typically for these, we're talking about shared devices. And in the case for the Walsh Group, since they are a construction company, you have people going in and out of construction sites. You're not usually able to bring a cell phone regardless. So being able to have like a small security key that they're able to sign in with just makes that process a lot easier. And even though sometimes they can get lost or, people forget them at home, they are cheaper to replace, again, than a cell phone being lost at a construction site, and easier to manage than having to procure devices for all of those employees. And so with that, I do have a recording of some folks at the Walsh Group. So I believe Pete would be on y'all's left and Tim on the right, talking about their passwordless deployment and actually getting to the point where their users started to forget their passwords.
Our help desk, if you ask Mike, he'd tell you that the help desk has been getting flooded with phone calls of people who are forgetting their password. They use it so infrequently they forget their password. And when they get an email saying, "Hey, it's time to reset your password. You need to know your password in order to change your password," and they don't remember their password. And quite honestly, I'm in that group of people. Not that I needed to go and change my password, but I've used my password so seldomly these days that when we have that application and we don't have single sign-on integrated in, that our help desk software doesn't have single sign-in integrated there. I didn't remember my password to sign into that environment, so that was kind of strange. But I guess it's kind of a good thing, right? I mean, because people aren't knowing their passwords and they can't get phished because they don't know their password. Password.
Yeah, as a security guy, that's music to my ears. I'm sorry the help desk feels that way, but for me, it's fantastic to hear that story. So I look at that as a good thing.
And so for this as well, as you'll see throughout, I asked the Walsh Group to be as candid as possible and to really talk about the positives and negatives of their passwordless deployment. And to Tim's point where he was talking about, how their help desk was a little bit confused and overwhelmed, that's because at that time they weren't using this feature, so getting into some of that more nitty-gritty deployment stuff. So for the use cases of the Walsh Group, they're now looking into rolling out temporary access pass also as well for those reset scenarios when somebody does need to reset their passwordless credentials as well. And so this is something that went public preview, I believe, in March 2021, so relatively recent, but it could be used for bootstrapping your passwordless credentials. So if you are starting out with Windows Hello for Business, or if you need to recover access to your account. And so essentially what temporary access pass is that it is a time-bound, strong key that you can scope for different users, and you can either make it a one-time use or a multi-use, and so your admin would be able to set that for the user to be able to reset and recover their account. And also as well, I have aka.ms links throughout, which is just like our URL shortening way, and then at the very end, I have like the PDF already posted with all of the content as well. So if you're like scrambling to take notes, like you're totally good, because I'll give you the entire deck literally at the end of this. And then so also going into communicating the business case. And for the Walsh Group, this was something that was quite a hurdle because they are a construction company. They're not a technology company. And even though they have an incredibly technical and amazing identity and security group, really being able to explain the business need for going passwordless to everybody else in their organization was something we spent a lot of time on. And so on the security front, I feel like everybody here would be able to, pretty well speak to users reusing passwords and how real phishing attacks are. And some of those numbers are pulled from that white paper that I have linked at the very bottom. But something as well that I worked not only with the Walsh Group, but with one of my other customers on is really pointing out the cost savings that can come to your organization with going passwordless and enumerating both the cost reduction for help desk tickets when it comes to users needing to reset their password, calling the help desk because of problems or getting their account locked out, and then also just the sheer time entering and resetting passwords. So I believe there was a study done, I'm blanking on the organization, but they found that users spend roughly 12 minutes a day either entering in passwords or resetting their passwords. And so if you're able to multiply that out and figure out for your organization what a realistic number might be time-wise and the cost to your organization, that's a great way to communicate to the business folks as to why it may be enticing for y'all to move to passwordless, and can be also used as justification for purchasing, some FIDO2 security tokens or something else for your team to be able to deploy this. Something else as well is user experience, and so it's one of those super few things that on the security side that users actually enjoy using because it does make their lives a little bit easier. And compliance as well, if your organization does have to abide by CMMC, which I also have, Pete and Tim talking about both the user experience and their experiences with meeting some of those compliance requirements that may apply to your organization depending on where you work.
Well, for us, it was more about like passwordless. What is it, right? There's like 3 different realms. There's Windows for Business, and then there's FIDO2, and then there's the Authenticator app. And so it was really trying to figure out where to prioritize our journey, right? And for us, it became more about the passwordless experience and trying to go down that route rather than focusing on password expiration policies and password complexity policies. I think those are things of the past, right? And so, and ironically enough, I don't know if you remember this or not, but ironically enough, with some of the compliance work we're doing with the federal government, it turns out that Windows for Business for us actually completes some compliance requirements specific to NIST frameworks that we have to follow.
Is that because we can tell make the machine be an additional factor in our MFA?
That's right. And when it comes to compliance like NIST 800-171 and CMMC, Microsoft has identified that specific to a control, that product allows us to satisfy the control, which puts us in a really good position. Good things for our end users. We're also doing things to meet some compliance regulations that we have coming down the pipeline.
Okay, and then lastly, this is a little bit of the nitty-gritty, so I am going to get a little more technical here and more specific to some of Walsh's use cases, so just FYI on that. Some of the deployment gotchas that they ran into, and I'm going to start off too with the Walsh group introducing their decision process between deciding either Key Trust or Cert Trust for Windows Hello for Business and why they went with one over the other, and then I'll dive into what that may mean for you and the options that are available there.
I mean, when it comes back to some of the technical hurdles, I think some of the challenges that we're seeing is we had to pick a direction with Windows for Business, and that was a bit of a challenge to go down. If I don't know if you remember this, but we talked about Key Trust versus Cert Trust, and Microsoft was very persuasive to tell us to use Key Trust. However, it lacks parity with Cert Trust when it comes to IT functions and leveraging.
How do you spell that? CERT?
Yes.
Cert Trust?
Yes.
Okay.
So it lacks parity, and that's one of the bad things is while we've deployed it, we don't get the benefit of using Windows Hello for Business for privileged accounts and privileged work that we may do in the IT department. So that's the bad. I think the good there is that they're working towards it, and we're very optimistic that they're going to bring that level of functionality to the product in the future for us. And going with Key Trust was actually the right approach because it was a much more straightforward, simple deployment that made a lot more sense for the type of companies, the size department we are. It really helped us get it deployed far faster and easier with limited outside help. While we did work with a Microsoft partner, we did a lot of the work ourselves, which was a lot more, it made us more successful.
Do you think, is this kind of one of those decisions, if you make the decision, you can't change it ever again, or can we go partway down the road and someday later switch the trust where?
I think you're stuck. That's a good question. Maybe we can pass it over to Bailey for that.
And that was a cute little transition. But when he was talking about some of those admin capabilities, I'm going to get into that as well as to, what is available and the workarounds for that. So first of all, if you're looking at Key Trust versus Cert Trust, and here I'm not going to talk about Cloud Trust because Cloud Trust isn't available yet, but once it is, that would be an option as well that you can weigh between. But ultimately, Key Trust is just going to be simpler to deploy and has fewer requirements when it comes to going through that deployment. So really the key things that you would need to be looking for are those 2016 DCs and being able to have a PKI as well. Also for context, Walsh has migrated off of ADFS, so that's also not something that they would need to be worried about as a prerequisite. But ultimately, when it comes down to simplicity, Key Trust is something that you would want to consider if you're just looking for the easiest deployment. Now, when he did mention the different capabilities for admins, he was specifically referring to the second bullet that I have on RDPing, and so that is something that you can do. Now, remote desktop does require a certificate, but those certs can be deployed with Key Trust. So there is a way for you to still be able to do that, and that's something that I'm working with one of the engineers at Walsh to be able to get deployed within their organization. A couple of other road bumps that they personally ran into. First of all, a lot of their users had already set up Windows Hello, which the naming is the worst that they're so similar, but that is different from Windows Hello for Business. Windows Hello is just a convenience pin, and it has totally different settings, and it doesn't have key-based or cert-based authentication backing it. So you would want to disable that in your environment to prevent that as a hurdle. Also, the ability to use external cameras, and I have a link on that below. And then using PIN over password, and I think that Tim really says it best. And this also goes back to explaining the business case that he used to explain to some of his peer groups within the construction industry on why PIN was super valuable.
Last week, Pete, I was in, I went to that CIE event, the Construction Information Executives group that I belong with, and it's me and 50 other CIOs from the construction industry. And I polled the crowd there about who's plugged into Windows Hello for Business, and a few of them are, but the vast majority of them weren't, and they were all very curious about our journey for Windows Hello for Business and why I thought it was so important. And I kind of got into a little discussion with another friend of mine there about that we've accepted to use PIN on the workstations, and he was challenging me about how secure that was and such. And so then I'm going to go back to the telephone again. I said, well, pick up your phone there, sign into your phone, and facial recognition. And I said, okay. And he, you're reading your email now, right? He said, oh yeah, I'm reading my email. And so then I said, well, give me your phone. And he handed it over to me, and I said, well, I can't sign in as you. It's asking me for a 6-digit PIN.
Nice.
It's like, oh,
nice.
I said, you tell me it's a 6-digit PIN is acceptable on your phone, but a 6-digit PIN is not acceptable on the laptop. And he just kind of said, you know what, that's kind of brilliant. Yeah, maybe I got it all wrong. So,
yeah, no, that's an interesting take, and I could appreciate that.
So I will get to all questions at the end. I purposely reserved 5 minutes because I know I kind of jumbled through that pretty quickly. But some other things that they ran into on the passwordless phone sign-in front, just to kind of get that out there as well as some of the technical things they ran into, the prerequisites was something that really got them as well as we were going through that deployment. So something that they ran into was, being able to set that authentication policy to any or to passwordless. That was something they ran into. And also allowing push notifications as a verification method, because that's something that they chose not to do. So we had to kind of work around that and enable some other things. But I would highly recommend just flipping that on and making it a little bit easier on yourselves. Also being able to make sure that your user population is running the latest version of iOS and Android. Now getting into kind of their last bit on passwordless phone sign-in, then I'll have some go-dos, all the links to everything, and we'll be able to have 5 minutes still for Q&A.
I really like where we're going with passwordless when it comes to the Authenticator app. I mean, one of the things that we're working on is we're trying to get our end users to stop relying on text messages more, right? When we deployed MFA, text was the number one feature to turn on. And while we turned off some features with the Authenticator app at the time around push, now having the number matching and the passwordless experience come through for the Authenticator app is really allowing us to kind of showcase why we're going passwordless and make it appealing to our end users to really kind of jump on the Authenticator app bandwagon and learn how much easier a login is going to become without having to remember your password. And
which carrier was that was recently breached? Was that Verizon or was it AT&T?
T-Mobile.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was T-Mobile. That's
Yeah.
right. Thank you. So the T-Mobile carrier, they had that big breach, and that one of the things that happened with it is that not only was it just customers' names and such, but phone numbers and then SIM ID, I think, was part of that too. So that that made it a lot easier for SIM attacks, which if people are relying on SMS for text responses for multi-factor authentication, that could actually be hijacked. And
Right.
if they rely on the Authenticator app instead, that's a good protection, at least protects them from that vector.
It does, and it brings in the passwordless experience, which makes it less cumbersome, makes the end user want to use it versus having to use it. And so bringing that all together, that's what we're looking for and trying to build that like user-friendly experience to kind of foster the use of it and grow it in the company so that, again, like we started this conversation, let's get everybody to forget their passwords. Let's make passwords irrelevant, right? And really get to a point where we're not forcing password resets and we're not worrying about complexities and really focusing on more progressive things like passwordless, like moving into the FIDO2 realm, leveraging Windows Hello for Business, and really getting into the app side of things. Because like you and I know, where's the first place we check email and work on apps, right? It's mostly on our mobile devices.
That's true.
Okay, and so as promised as well, since I know that some folks were taking pictures of slides, which totally feel free, but this makes it easier, the one URL that you need is aka.ms/authenticatecondeck, and that'll take you to a PDF of this entire deck. So you'll have all the links that I had in here because I know there were a lot of links that went to specific deployment guidance pieces. And those links as well, I went through old emails and chats that I had with the Walsh group, and they literally referenced those exact questions that popped up during their deployment process with some of the gotchas. So this way you'll have them ahead of time if you choose a similar path to the Walsh group, so you won't fall into the same kind of gotchas that they did. But to leave you with some other go-dos, I think that it's really important to map out your different user populations ahead of time. And I know it was simplified on that deck just because we only have 25 minutes together, but in reality, that took a much longer time talking through those different use cases. For example, as well, one of my other customers is a major airline, and talking through this with them is also different when you're looking at flight attendants versus pilots versus people who are working in air traffic control. So really mapping those out, even though they all fall under the bubble of frontline worker, can really look different for your organization when it comes to that rollout process. Also looking into prerequisites for your passwordless methods. So that's something that the Walsh group had some issues with since they were super gung-ho, which is awesome, but then we would find ourselves kind of putting the tires on the car as it was moving. So also important to plan ahead with some of those prerequisites as you are mapping out those user groups. As they mentioned as well, those issues that they had with help desk, if it is possible, leverage something like temporary access pass to make that account recovery process a little bit easier. And then communicate the why to relevant folks within your organization. So especially if you are in an organization that may be a little bit more hesitant to change, really mapping out the cost reduction that may be there, the better user experience, if those different compliance regulations may apply to you, such as CMMC, looking into how you can kind of double dip on those things you already have to satisfy and making it easier not only on yourself as an IT professional, but also on your organization. And with that, I wanted to thank y'all for your time, and I've reserved looks like we have 3 minutes left to do some Q&A if possible, but I'm also happy to talk outside since I know there's a session after this one.
Hi, Bailey.
Hey.
I'm Nagapan. I work in Microsoft too. Just a correction, it's not a question. Convenience pin and the Windows Hello is not the same. Convenience pin is a traditional world where it doesn't understand about the cloud. It's just the password stuffer, stored and get the Kerberos key from the on-prem AD. Later we moved on to Windows Hello. Windows Hello is still a MFA credential. MFA against your non-org identities, for example, MS account. I have Naga csc@outlook.com. If I log in with a Windows Hello, it gets the MFA. And I have same pin used for my Windows Hello for Business against our Microsoft tenant. So Windows Hello for Business, it's a pretty much MFA credential every time. Convenience pin is a traditional one. I just want to give you the clarification. It's nothing much important. Convenience pin no longer supported. It's outdated one. Thank you.
Okay, and so with that as well, so you're correct that, terminology for convenience pin as well. And I know Libby's also here from our Passwordless team, and she can shed some light on some of those things. But Windows Hello and Windows Hello for Business are different, and you're totally right that Windows Hello for Business does fall back to that pin when it's not able to see your face, when like the lighting might be weird. Similar to like on your phone, if you've ever had where you're trying to do Face ID, then it'll prompt you for that pin as well. So that's how you bootstrap that credential. So that's how that would work. And Libby, if there's anything else you wanted to add on to that as well. Okay, cool. Oh, awesome.
All right, what was the process that Walsh Group had to take internally to get buy-off on going passwordless?
Oh, that's a great question. So talking through those cost savings was a big one because they are a construction company first, and so being able to make sure that everybody was on board with that. Also, some of the examples that Tim gave as well, the exact example he gave to his PIN group, so similar to the comment that you made earlier, that, you know, hey, what's the difference? I'm just using a PIN, and also, you know, hey, I have a password, and my password's super long, so that must be more secure than just 6 digits because, you know, that's just silly when that PIN is tied to your device. So it's similar to if I'm able to figure out, you know, your PIN to your iPhone, I would have to actually take your iPhone from you and then type in that PIN, which at that point we're getting into some spy movie level stuff. And if I have your device anyway, it's game over. So that argument is pretty moot to begin with. So being able to talk through those scenarios in a simple way that people on the business side are able to understand is super valuable. And that was something that the Walsh Group really found value in to get buy-in.
And then lastly, are there any KPI metrics like cost savings that Walsh Group can share? I guess that's probably one that you need to come back to us on. But.
Yeah, I can come back to y'all on that. If there's a way to see who asked it, you know, I'm happy to follow up with them afterwards. Or if you're watching online, you know, feel free to reach out either on Twitter. It's just my first and last name, Bailey Bercik, and I'm happy to, you know, see what we can do to help you out there.
Any other questions from the room? All right, thank you, Bailey.
Awesome. Thank you so much.